Call to order the meeting of the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing
This
Aid
meeting is
Dispensers
being
Board.
recorded.
It is Friday, October 28th, 2022, and it is 9:03. Um, Sharice, would you like to call the roll to make sure we have a quorum?
Absolutely. Dr. Raju,
Here?
Ms. Kaiser,
Here.
Mr. Borges,
Here.
Ms. Chang,
Here.
Ms. Dominguez,
Here.
Ms. Snow,
Here.
Dr. Valdez, Dr. White.
Here.
We do have a quorum, so you can go ahead and proceed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to open the full board session with item number 2, public comment for items not on the agenda. Can I ask the moderator to open for public comment, please?
We are now taking public comment for items not on the agenda. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, we have a full agenda today, but we can't really start without doing first things first, and that is acknowledging Debbie Snow's service to the board. You can read this slide for yourself to see she has many accomplishments and is very engaged and involved person in her life in Southern California, and a lot having to do with advocacy for consumers. So she was a great fit for our board, and this will be her last meeting. So if we could scroll down and look at the certificate of appreciation that we developed for Debbie, I'd like to read it for you. It says, in recognition of your years of dedicated commitment to the protection of consumers of speech and hearing services, your thoughtful contributions to the decision-making process, and your warmth and humanity as a member of the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board from November 30th to 2013 through November 30th, 2022. So we will be preparing this certificate and getting it down to Debbie very soon. We wanted to make sure it was just perfect before we sent it. We did send her flowers on behalf of the board, which I think she received. We saw a picture of her with the flowers and a bear, which was very nice. I would like to make a personal statement about Debbie on our time on the board. I really can't believe that we've worked together since 2013. It just seems forever. After many years of being on the board where we had public members who would sleep through our meetings, even to the point of snoring during the meetings, it was really a pleasant surprise when Debbie came to the board, someone who paid attention to the issues. She was always making reasonable comments. She asked appropriate questions and provided, I would say, mature and thoughtful decisions. What I'm saying is that she was always engaged and still is. I loved hearing about her chinchillas whenever we got together and what was happening in her daughter's life. We talked about many things over the years and shared lots of dinners throughout California. We often raised a glass or two, but for Debbie, it was only one because she warned us that one was her limit. Otherwise, we'd have to walk her to her room, which we all laughed about. Anyway, I will miss working with her, and I wish her the best in the future, and I hope we can stay in touch. Does anyone else on the board like to make a comment?
Hi, Dr. Rajo. This is Paul Sanchez. I would like to make a few comments here too regarding Debbie Snow. When I first came to the board, Debbie Snow was one of the very first board members that I met. She has been on the board about the same. She came to the board a little bit before I came to the board, and the first thing that struck me about her was the seriousness in which she, took her role as a public member and consumer protection. We had rubbed shoulders with some of the same people that are involved in consumer protection. We had a lot to talk about, and all throughout the time that I have been with the board, she has always kept the topic of consumer protection and the issues and enforcement and discipline, at the forefront. She's a very kind person, and everything that she approaches with that kindness and with that seriousness of consumer protection in mind. I cannot say enough about Debbie. I think the stories that you told about board meetings and the memories are really good. I didn't get to experience anyone sleeping at a meeting, but I do want to say that we had some great conversations. I think it's been 8 years, and during that time, we've seen our kids grow up, go through different stages in life, and we've been able to not just share the work, but share our lives together. So, Debbie, we're going to really miss you. You're going to, definitely leave some big shoes to fill here in your role as a public member. So, on behalf of the staff and the Department of Consumer Affairs and everyone here, I just want to extend my most sincerest appreciation for your service to the board. Thank you, Debbie.
This is Debbie. You guys are going to make me cry if you keep going on. I just want to tell you all how touched I am. The flowers and the stuffed little bear was such a sweet surprise. I almost credited my husband, and he would have taken the credit. But I was so touched, and I've loved working with all of you, Paul and Marcia. I've gotten to know you two the most, and I've loved working on the board. I've loved learning so much from all of you, and if I could, I'd stay longer, and I'm sure I'd learn more, but it's just been an honor serving with you, and I appreciate everything you've done to help me and all of the kind words. And that's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Anybody else want to make a comment?
Yes, this is Holly. Since I've been on the board, we were going through the whole COVID era, and we've only had one meeting in person. Luckily, I had more time with Deborah because we were on the enforcement committee, and she was good at holding my hand. She was, sharing just her experience on the board. And so I feel like I got to know her a little bit better because of that time with her. So I'd like to thank you again for all of that time, Deborah, and your everything everybody said is so true. Your kindness, your wisdom is just so appreciated.
Thank you, Holly. I'm just speechless over here, but I just appreciate all of you so much, and all of this time on the board has just been wonderful. I'm going to miss it and all of you so much.
Okay, are there any other comments from board members? Okay, not seeing any. As odd as this is, we have to keep with protocol, and that is I have to ask the moderator to open for public comment.
We are now accepting public comment on the matter. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to Ms. Snow?
Yes. So, again, Debbie, you're not done yet. We still have to hear from you more today, but we do wish you all the best. Let's move on to agenda item 4, review and possible approval of August 11/12/2022 board meeting minutes. I think Maria is going to talk to us about this.
Thank you, Dr. Raggio. Attached is the August minutes, which includes the board meeting with updates on the board's activity, including the business modernization project, revisions to the board's administrative procedure manual, the sunset review, regulations, and legislation. At this meeting, the board adopted proposed regulatory language regarding CPD requirements, CE requirements, and slip application and processing time. The board also changed its position on AB 2806 regarding preschool mental health reimbursement rates and SB 1453 regarding the fees procedures. Also included are the minutes for the audiology practice and hearing aid dispensing committees.
Okay, would the board have any issues or corrections, discussion items on the minutes? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to ask for a motion to accept these minutes.
Motion to accept the minutes.
And a second?
Second.
Can I ask that we open for public comment?
We are now accepting public comment on the motion. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Please dial star and we will have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the vote?
Yes, thank you. Okay, if there's no further discussion, I would like to ask Charisse to call the vote on our motion.
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio,
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser,
Aye.
Mr. Borges,
Aye.
Ms. Chang,
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez,
Aye.
Ms. Snow,
Aye.
Dr. Valdez,
Aye.
Dr. White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Agenda item number 5 is the DCA update, DCA Board and Bureau's relations. My understanding is that Melissa Gear has to be at another board meeting this morning, so Shelley Jones has kindly agreed to come in and provide us with that update. Is Ms.
I
Jones?
guess it would help if I unmuted my microphone. Good morning. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to provide you with your DCA update today. First, let me say on behalf of DCA, thank you to Member Snow for your years of service on the board. Your dedication and service to protecting California's consumers is greatly appreciated. As Chair Raggio mentioned, we are very excited to announce that the governor has recently appointed our new Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Relations, Melissa Gear. She joined the department on October 3rd and brings a wealth of experience. She previously served as the Chief Deputy Legislative Director at the Department of Insurance, where she was since 2014. And she's also served at the California State Teachers Retirement System, California Attorney General's Office, and the Legislative Analyst's Office. You'll be seeing her at one of your next meetings very soon. Director Kimberly Kirchmeier established the department's first Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Steering Committee, also known as DEI Committee, and that's to guide the department in its equity strategy, initiatives, and action plans. The DEI Committee will hold its official kickoff meeting on November 9th in 2022. Along that same topic, in accordance with Governor Gavin Newsom's executive order, strategic plans in effect July 2023 and beyond must be developed or updated to more effectively advance equity and drive outcomes that increase opportunity for all. In response, DCA is revising its strategic planning processes to incorporate more inclusive public engagement, data analysis, and embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion into the strategic planning process. Over the coming months, the DEI committee will inform the strategic planning processes, and by March 2023, we will begin implementing the revised processes and working with the boards in updating their existing strategic plans or in the development of new strategic plans. You'll be hearing more on that as we move forward. It is that time of year again for the Our Promise campaign. DCA is excited to take part in it again. And we celebrate 65 years of caring for California for this year's Promise program. This year, the Vice Chair is Lourdes Castro Ramirez, Secretary of the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, and our DCA Our Promise co-chairs are Chief Deputy Director Christine Lawley and Deputy Director Melissa Gear. The campaign began on October 1st and will end on December 31st. This campaign allows Californians to donate to a nonprofit or nonprofits of their choice. And with your assistance, DCA hopes to continue its tradition of generosity and caring for our communities through this year's campaign. Please assist us in spreading the word, encouraging all members and staff to make a one-time donation or donate online through Cal Employee Connect. California can be cared for as little as $5 per month. Regarding in-person meeting guidelines and COVID-19 safety measures, through legislation, though legislation has passed allowing remote meetings through June 30th of 2023, we are reminding boards that choose to hold in-person meetings of the safety measures, best practices, and recommendations for holding public meetings. When planning for upcoming meetings, please remember that all board and bureau members and staff are expected to follow the state and local public health guidelines that apply in the area where meetings are held. The CDPH recently released updated guidance for the use of face masks. Please refer to the guidance ahead of meetings to determine the appropriate masking approach for your meeting. And if masks are recommended for your meeting location, please post face covering guidance signage at your meeting check-in or entrance. Regarding travel, as travel begins to pick up, it is important to remember that state travel arrangements must be made through the DCA's approved travel agency, which is the Cal Travel Store or Concur. All board bureau members and staff must use the most economical fares possible when traveling by air on official state business. Typically, this will be the Southwest Want to Getaway option. However, there may be additional charges if changes are made to the flight. Flight changes to the date and time for personal convenience are not approved or a justified reason, and the traveler will be responsible for any associated charges. Additionally, AB 1887 prohibits state agencies, departments, boards, authorities, and commissions from traveling to states that are subject to California's travel ban. There are now 23 prohibited states. On the website of the Attorney General, you can view the entire list. DCA will partner with the State Controller's Office to share information with consumers and certain licensees about the Unclaimed Property Program. State law requires banks, insurance companies, corporations, and other entities to report and submit their customers' property to the SCO after a period of inactivity, which is generally 3 years. Certain DCA licensees will benefit from this partnership as it will educate them about the responsibility to report unclaimed property and assist with compliance. Additionally, the program is a great resource for all consumers to locate their unclaimed property. As always, DCA is here to help, and if there's anything we can do to assist, please don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, I will turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you, Shelley. Really appreciate the update. Are there any comments or discussion among the board members? Can I just clarify something, Shelley? If there's a state that is on the Attorney General's list that we can't travel to, we can pay our own way if we must go to some event. That's allowable.
I will confirm that. I believe that is correct, but I will get confirmation of that and get that information back to the program to let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other board discussion? Seeing none, I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment.
We are now accepting public comment on the DCA update. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Okay, thank you again, Shelley. Really appreciate your meeting with us today and for the update. Really appreciate that a lot. Okay, let's move to agenda item 6, which is the board chair's report. You can see that our calendar only goes through today's meeting, and I believe Charisse is going to be talking to us later about potential dates for 2023. Is that correct, Charisse?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
The end of the meeting today.
So we won't be discussing that at this point. Again, just check your standing committee assignments so that you know which committee your committees you might be on, so that you can make sure you're there. I'm not sure what will happen with Debbie's with a replacement. That's probably way down the road, so we have to be cognizant of that going forward. Can I ask, though, Ms. Snow to provide an update on the Enforcement Ad Hoc Committee meeting?
Yes, sure. Let me just grab my notes here. Yesterday, Holly Kaiser and I met as the ad hoc enforcement committee with our executive officer, board staff, including the enforcement staff, legal counsel, and Deputy Attorney General Rose Luzon. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. The board staff, since our last meeting together, has made excellent progress on updating and improving disciplinary guidelines for all 3 professions into a single comprehensive guidelines. There was a lot of discussion about adding specific timelines and standard provisions to probation requirements, and how general board uniform standards will integrate with our particular guidelines. Sadly, this is my last meeting, but I'm confident that Holly and other board members assigned to this committee will continue to collaborate with our great staff to complete a proposed regulatory package for discipline guidelines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Let's go on with all 3 reports, and then we can come back to questions from the board. I would like to report on the Audiology Practice Committee and provide an update on what we talked about there. There were 2 main topics that we talked about. One of them was audiology aids and the fact that it's a longstanding and unresolved nature of that issues surrounding the tasks that they can and can't do, supervisory issues, things like that. And after a lot of discussion yesterday, there appear to be 2 viable avenues for resolution for this. One is to minimize the limitations for the scope of tasks of the aid so that their utilization is realistic and actually useful to the licensee, with the knowledge that any consequences for consumer harm would fall to the supervising licensee. However, we may choose to determine the tasks that an aid can and can't do. We can delineate the types and degrees of supervision from the start of supervision until some amount of time later, or by virtue of the complexity of the tasks they're being trained to do. The second option is that we can consider creating another license type modeled after that of the SLIPA, that is an audiology assistant, and information about the sunrise process for creating a new license type will be discussed later today. It was noted that the work to either create new regulations or sunrise legislation of a new license type are equally arduous tasks. The outcome was to ask that the board staff investigate and provide to the board at some later meeting any historical information on the evolution of the SLIPA license. That is, what was the motivation to do that? What were the concerns? What was the determination with regard to supervision and so on? And from this information, we believe the board may gain a better understanding of how to approach a resolution to this complicated issue with either option. The second item we talked about is the RPE requirements for a 12-month experience. As you know, the board was made aware by AUD supervisors out there that requiring the 12-month RPE experience to occur entirely after the completion of all coursework in an AUD program caused significant hardship for the program and the students. So in our sunset review legislation, we asked for the elimination of that language that it had to occur after the completion of coursework. So the board is willing and able to investigate and determine any potential regulatory changes that could allow for earlier clinical rotation time and hours to count toward the 12-month experience. So in order to better understand all aspects of these rotations, about supervision, when they occur in the course of the program, the amount of supervision and so on, the board developed a approximately 50 question survey that was sent to all AUD program and clinical directors. So both, we'd get a perspective from both the administrative piece and the clinical piece of the program. And once these responses are received, which we've designated as by 12/31/22, they will then be analyzed and reported at a later board meeting. So that completes the update on the Audiology Practice Committee. Can I ask Todd to report on the Hearing Aid Dispensing Committee?
Sure. Thank you very much. We had two different questions in front of the dispensing committee. It was a continuation from the previous discussion that we had at our last meeting on first on the reviewing and possible action on regulations regarding hearing aid dispensing trainees. Primarily, it was answering questions for the board so that it could be put forth the language for regulation. One of the big things that comes out of it is that trainees are no longer going to be, the 80-20 rule is essentially going away, and the supervisor has to be physically present in the office the entire time, which is a pretty significant change over what it was in the past. The rest of it was mostly cleaning up language and questions on clarity of different items concerning how long to keep record maintenance and how many hours of continuing ed. I do have one question that I thought of after we had adjourned. A couple questions. I don't know if it's appropriate to ask it this time or later, but I'll throw it out there and then smack me down if
I think
I'm
it's
not allowed.
appropriate. Todd, go ahead.
Okay. The first question is, how long will this take for these new rules to actually take effect, and that the individuals out there will be governed by these new rules?
Sharice or Paul, do you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we're at the committee stage where we're looking at language. It still has to go to the full board. And then after the full board approves language, then the regulations analyst will work on that with BCA Regulatory Council to go through a pre-review process. And that could take a few months, up to 6 months. It just depends on how long to go back and forth. The department is always trying to make sure that anything that we bring forward has all the T's crossed, I's dotted, that it's not going to have a problem with the Office of Administrative Law before you go to notice. Once we go to notice, it's 45 days for public comment. And then if there are changes to be made, it could be another 45 days or another 15 days. So generally speaking, once you're at the Office of Administrative Law, we're talking about a year's process to get through there. But usually the getting there is the part that we've had a lot of back and forth to get there. So my guess would be at least 18 months to 2 years is when we're looking at that actually becoming effective. And then of course, that all can be delayed for a variety of reasons, but let's hope for the 18 months to 2 years.
Okay. And that's pretty much standard for anything we do, right?
It's pretty much standard. And then if a reg set becomes more complex, it requires fee studies or anything else, it can take longer. So this one's changing policy. Hopefully it's just the 18 months to 2 years. If you have to add in fee studies and the like, it could become longer. It just depends.
Okay. And the other question I have is especially related to the fact that it is a pretty major change in how trainees are being supervised compared to what it's been for decades. Is there any thought or consideration to any type of a notice going out other than maybe a banner across the website, but any type of notice going out to the community at large to let them know, by the way, this is happening and you need to make sure you're in compliance?
So what I would tell you is that normally we send out the agendas and highlight issues so that it can be discussed at that board meeting. So we do highlight ones that we're going to take action on, and we send it to the licensees and the listserv for the agenda. When it comes to the actual regulation, we send it out to the regulation listserv, and I usually send it out to the licensees impacted. Then during public comment, that's open and available. They also get notice again when we have it at the board meeting to discuss the comments. And then once we are at the implementation stage, we do send out listserv announcements to the regulated community about what's changing and how they need to be in compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Todd, this is Paul. I think we also have other resources available to us. And if we have that much time, the committee or the board may want to consider, looking at educational efforts, not just with this, but other efforts or initiatives that the board is taking. Obviously that requires resources, but we do have our public affairs office at DCA that would probably be willing to step in and give us assistance in that area, because I agree, this is really important to let the hearing aid dispensing community out there know what these regulatory changes are and why we're doing it and what is going to be required of them.
Would it be appropriate for us to maybe attend various conferences to say something to the community at large?
Yeah, absolutely. Outreach is something that we're doing. You'll hear some of this quarter's outreach that we've done, but I'm always interested. Our office is always interested in participating in outreach efforts, and especially when we can partner with board members to go out to some of these conferences or venues or meetings even to discuss the changes.
Okay, thank you. Something I definitely want to keep in mind as time grinds on with this. So that was our first topic that we went through, and we're now at a stage where we pretty much agreed on the changes. So I think the next stage is it coming before the full board. Am I correct in that?
I mean,
For which one? The trainee?
Or for the first, yes, for the trainees.
Trainee will be going back to the committee, and hopefully we'll, at that next committee meeting.
Next committee will finalize it.
Ready, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then the second topic was amending regulations regarding hearing aid dispenser advertising requirements. And again, that was primarily questions about the changes for clarification. I think the biggest change is removing all of the examples that have been in the regs for many, many years now, and simplifying the language to make it a little bit easier to understand what is allowed and what isn't allowed. As much as I liked the examples, I can understand where they would be confusing to some people. And certainly some of the examples are very out of date and aren't even appropriate anymore. So that's probably overall a good thing that that's being done. And that was essentially it. Any questions on that?
Is there any board discussion on any other reports from the subcommittees or standing committees? Okay, I presume that the board staff will be providing all of the historical slip of information to the audiology practice committee first, so that we can look that over and then bring the issue back to the full board. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Seeing no further board discussion, I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment.
We are now open for public comment on agenda item 6. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you for those reports. And I'd like to move on now to agenda item 7, which is the executive officer's report.
Good morning, everyone. This is Paul. It's agenda item 7, and the report and backup materials are in your binder, or if you've downloaded them, they're part of some of our materials are hand carry, especially this. So I think we sent that. Is it on the website too? Yeah, and it's available on our website. So I'll start with just an administrative update. As you know, we've been heavily involved in our business modernization project, especially most recently in launching that. And that obviously has taken a drain on our resources. So first and foremost, I just want to express my appreciation to our staff, because I walk through the halls here and I see everyone with headphones on. They're either involved in testing or some type of development, or they're supporting the staff that are doing all the work. So there's a lot of scrambling, a lot of changes that are constantly happening, and I think that Cherise, Tim Yang, and all of the licensing staff have just done a great job there. We're trying to fill behind that position to just kind of continue to supplement our own resources in the office, and we hope to have interviews being held probably within the next month. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the outreach efforts that we've made. As Todd Borges asked, if this is something that we can do. I do want to express my interest, especially in going out to the hearing aid dispensing community. That's not something that I've had much of an opportunity to do during my time. So I do talk to hearing aid dispensers, but I would love to formally, present or discuss some of the things that the board is doing that affect hearing aid dispensers, some of the changes and trends that are happening. Obviously, as you know, with over-the-counter hearing aids, there are a lot of changes that we anticipate. On September 9th and 10th, Dr. Raggio and I presented to the California Academy of Audiology. And we also had Dr. Amy White there. The presentation was focused on, I usually give an overview of the board. We talk about the importance of the board in licensing and enforcement. This time we focused a lot on the legislative and regulatory processes. We felt that this was really important because this was well received and a lot of interest at the CASHA conference. So we presented the same type of information. There was a lot of interest, especially with the changes that are happening. A lot of questions regarding over-the-counter hearing aids, third-party administrator insurance issues. And I had both Dr. Rajo and Dr. White there that helped us field questions. It's always interesting because after presenting, we never seem to have enough time, and we have our own little mini conference out in the hall because the questions just continue. So I'm appreciative to the California Academy of Audiology for including the board in their agenda and allowing us to present. On October 3rd, Cherise Burns and I presented, along with some of our third-party vendor staff. They were there to help us to provide California CAPCID, that's the Council of Academic Programs in Communication Sciences and Disorders. The directors meet on a quarterly basis, and I promised them that I was going to do a demo for them, and I had Cherise there. She provided them with a demo and kind of showed them exactly what it would look like for an applicant to sign up. You know, these meetings are sometimes remote meetings, so you can't see everyone's faces, but we could definitely hear their excitement. They expressed, you know, a great deal of appreciation for this. I think this is a long-awaited accomplishment for the board, so very proud of it. We know that there are, you know, a lot of bumps for people that are just getting started, but those directors who have a lot of experience dealing with applicants certainly could see the progress that we've made, and we're appreciative of that. On October 14th and 15th, I attended the National Council of State Boards of Examiners for Speech-Language Pathology and Audiology, their annual conference in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The conference theme was good governance and focused on inclusion and collaboration in the regulation of audiology and speech-language pathology. The topics included diversity, equity, inclusion, the National Practitioner Data Bank, interstate compacts, over-the-counter hearing aids, and then there's a state information exchange. There were about 13 states and 1 Canadian province in attendance. I thought it was very good to be there, and I did benefit from talking to some of the other states, some of the other boards. You kind of hear what they're doing and some of the things that they're going through right now. You know, we've gone through probably, you know, in the last 8 years or so that I've been here. So I do appreciate the interaction. I think that the conference would definitely benefit from having more states participating and even possibly provide a remote format. I think this is something that, you know, we could talk about in the future. We could follow this conference and see if this is something that we might want to attend or have board members attend. Moving on to our budget report, we have limited data right now that was provided to us by the Department of Consumer Affairs. So as we get the data, we will be able to see more what we're dealing with and what our projections are. But we don't anticipate any problems with our budget this year. We've also included a fund condition that kind of shows you the balance of our fund and how we project our months in reserve for upcoming years. Section D of the report includes a table with our regulations. It's a high-end report. We will provide a more detailed report at agenda item number 7. I want to move on to our licensing report. And we're going to talk a little bit about business modernization, so I don't want to go too much into this, but again, I want to emphasize that we have launched our new online application system, and we are currently receiving applications, RPE applications for speech-language pathology and audiology. We're also receiving speech-language pathology license applications, permanent applications, equivalent, and those that were previously licensed in California. And we're receiving audiology permanent applications for those that go through the RPE process. Overall, I think our cycling times are doing quite well considering all the resources that have been drained for this project. If any of you have ever had experience with government institutions or working on these modernization projects, they are pretty intense, and they can be somewhat exhausting at times. But again, I think that when I look at the numbers, we want to catch up. We're doing dual tracks while we're handling the online applications. We're also having to deal with some of the paper applications from our previous peak season. So overall, I think the licensing staff are doing well. I've also included results from the practical examination report for July in your materials, and I have some enforcement statistics, licensing statistics, and the disciplinary actions that have been taken for the last 12 months. At this time, I'll entertain any board questions you might have, board members.
I was just wondering if you see any potential snags with the online applications. Are there any kind of red flags that are coming up, or is it all working the way you thought it would?
Well, I think from where I'm sitting, you know, we will experience snags at times. And from where I'm sitting, it can be it's very easy to get worried or to get concerned. But I do think that, fortunately, this is my third project of this type in state government. So I think if it were the first time I were doing this, I would be much more concerned. But my context is having dealt with this at CalSTRS, having dealt with this at the Veterinary Medical Board. And I don't want to sound like, I'm talking butterflies and rainbows, but I have to say that in comparison to those projects, this project has gone extremely well. Sometimes I find myself, going and sharing that with staff. I know Sharice has also gone through some of this with her previous board. So I think that experience has really helped us. Are there snags? Yes. Are there going to be continuous snags? Probably. I think these projects usually, that's kind of the nature of these projects. But I think overall things are actually going pretty well. I don't want to, be overly dramatic and say that it's, been smooth all the way, because it hasn't. But I think it's been what we expected at this point.
And I would tell you that, this is Sharice, we've built in processes to also bring these issues up. So we have multiple short meetings per week to see if there's any issues that have come up with submitted online applications, to troubleshoot issues we find. And licensing staff are excellent at bringing forward any either user errors or potentially system errors that we have found with the system. So we've had a couple small ones, we've troubleshooted them and implemented changes within a very short time frame considering prior projects. So it's going rather well, and we have a lot of different systems and checks in there. I think each and every time you launch something, and I think Paul would attest to this, you never get to launch a perfect product. There's always some bug you didn't think of, or some weird thing that the applicant can do that you never thought to test in the first place. So you find them out, you fix them, and usually within the next week or two, we're able to launch something to fix any issue that we might have found.
Yeah, there is a great deal of prioritization and discipline involved, because you want everything to be perfect. You want to touch everything. And if you stop and try to fix everything, you won't meet your deadline and you won't get this thing launched. So we do know that it's a work in progress, and we have to balance out those priorities.
Do you have IT staff that's just readily available to come and work on snags?
We have people that are working with us. We have we do have IT staff that work with us. I don't know how readily available they are, but I think they're.
We're in constant communication. We do have a really old data system, so a lot of times I'm not going to get too techie. So the talking between the old system and the new system gets a little bit wonky, and it's sometimes a lot more troubleshooting than we would think for a few things, but we find a way to work it out, and As long as that person is not on vacation for a week, we generally have a lot of quick response and go back and forth, and it gets handled pretty quickly. So, you know, overall, DCAIT, our vendors, and then also the SimplyGov platform. Between the three, we're getting a lot of coordination and troubleshooting, and they're doing a fantastic job helping us troubleshoot these issues.
Can I just clarify one more thing? I thought we were going to have a slower rollout for different license types. Am I correct in thinking that you rolled them out sooner and more of them present?
No,
No?
Well, I will say this. I think that we have been on target as far as our schedule goes, but I I think Dr. Raja, you are correct. When we started this project, we were anticipating that we would have something completed, the first stages of this completed in 2023. But we have been according to project schedule. And so on one hand, yes, we're ahead of schedule from what we anticipated when we started. But once we set out a plan, we knew that we were going to be putting this out in the late fall, early winter.
And our original plan was to release the RPE applications, both speech and audiology, and the SLP application types in September. We did end up adding the audiology permanent license in there because of the similarities between the SLP permanent and the AUD permanent when you've gone through the RPE path or qualification method. So there really was no reason to wait on that because it was already built and it's so similar. So.
And when we provide our report, we can talk about some of the other additions and things that we've gained, features that we didn't think we were going to have.
Are you doing public reporting that this is up and available to the professional organizations yet, or other than the conferences? Or
mostly the conferences so far. We have not sent out marketing materials to the associations yet. I presumed it would be better to wait at least a little bit longer so that the full suite of speech and audiology are released at the end of November, and then it can be one big rollout because there's only a couple application types up right now. And then we would do a similar rollout with the hearing side in February, because we'll be done by January 30th is the plan.
And more importantly, when an applicant goes on and wants to apply for a license, this is going to be their option. This is going to be the avenue that they get on. So when they go on to our website and they say, I want to apply for a license, it's really difficult to not get onto the online system.
We've set it up to be their first location to go to is the online system. You have to go hunting if you want to find the downloadable PDF.
that all makes sense, and it's really exciting that we finally get this up and running. Is there any other board comment on the executive officer report? Oh, Holly?
Yes. I'm curious whether there is some opportunity for the users to just give you a quick, some quick feedback about this exciting change. Is I know a lot of times when I'm doing some kind of online application, at the end it might say, you give X number of stars if you thought it was helpful, or is there anything built into it like that feedback?
We currently don't have anything built into that, but we could look into that. Currently, the surveys we do have that are built to get consumer or customer service information aren't really geared towards questions about the online application system. So we've been taking any sort of feedback we get via email or phone calls and adding that to what we're going to be updating our FAQs with. But we could develop a small survey that could be included with the emails they get for the thank you for submitting your application. That's something we could develop.
Any other board questions? Seeing none, I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment.
We are open for public comment on agenda item 7. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Okay, let's move along to agenda item 8, update on the board's business modernization project and upcoming releases of online applications for licensure. Paul and Sharice will take this discussion.
Yes, I just wanted to, we've talked quite a bit already about BizMod, and I think the way my report went, we were planning on giving a preview, but we went in depth into it. So I don't need to go over everything again and repeat that, but I do want to, again, emphasize the progress that has been made. And I want Sharice Burns to have an opportunity to maybe talk about some specifics and maybe some real advantages that we've found, and any disadvantages or any concerns that we might have.
So let's go ahead and start with just a recap of the releases. So, release 1 was in September, and that was the RPE license types and the speech language pathology license. There are a couple speech language pathology license options that are still in the works that'll go out with the second release. The second release will include audiology licenses, speech language pathology assistant or SLPA registration, and then the speech language pathology and audiology aid registration, if I can get out of my mouth, along with the few remaining SL speech language pathology licenses. And then next year, at the end of January 30th, 2023, we'll be launching the hearing aid dispenser licenses, the hearing aid dispenser trainee, and the temporary license, as well as the branch license. And then the temporary licenses for those coming from out of state that are licensed in another state. So that would be temporary licenses for speech, language pathology, audiology, and hearing aid dispensers, and the dispensing audiology license, as well as the CE course and CPD provider applications. That'll round out all of the release of the online applications, and that'll be followed also by a website, part of our website it will have a portal. People can put in their information and see where their application is essentially in the process, what's missing, what's deficient, so on and so forth. So it's kind of like a light application status lookup. And that should be happening after we get done with release 4 or 3. So that'll be after January 30th. One of the biggest things that I want to hit home is that originally this project had been a online submission and online payment option. While that would have been helpful for external, the applicants and everything, and we would get more complete applications coming in, we've really done a ton of business process improvements and modernization and customization to these applications to where this is not just submit an online application and then we, work it here in the office and print it out. We've truly developed, and I won't do the tech talk, but we've worked to make this new system talk to the old system and fulfill things and to operate in a way that will allow staff to operate predominantly in the new system and save a lot more time. It's going to cut down on a ton of the back and forth. It will have options for when an applicant makes a mistake on one part of their application, we can loop them back through and they can resubmit online. So we're trying to keep them all online, all paperless as much as possible. We'll be uploading transcripts into the online system when we get them. So a lot of this is going to make it a complete system, along with a few other benefits, such as an address change form that's done online. So there are going to be a few other perks that come along with this because you need that as part of the application process as well. So we're getting a ton more return on investment with this product and the way that it's being rolled out than we initially had planned. So we do expect to see quite a few efficiencies within the next year. So we're very excited to see what it looks like come next year this time when everybody's online and hopefully more complete applications, easier and faster to work, and all systems talking to each other as much as possible. So we're very excited about this. There will always be bumps in the road. We will find weird things that we never thought of. One example being an applicant figured out a way to pay without submitting their application. So we have fixed that. But that was an interesting one. We didn't think to test that. But there's always going to be little items here and there. It won't fix everything under the sun, but it will fix probably the majority of the issues we currently run into and the majority of manual operations time that licensing staff have to do that, that will shorten that time frame and allow them to do more of the analytical work of reviewing and ensuring people are eligible for their license at a faster pace. So they're spending less time on that manual paper sorting, combining, all of the routine manual stuff that we do with current paper application. So.
Can I add one more thing, Sharice? I wanted to also remind everyone that we are healthy fiscally with this project. That may be a question. You might be thinking of how much is all this costing the board. The board has actually been able to absorb these costs, and if you recall, we received a grant from the State Department of Technology, thank you, and that's been a great help and has probably going to absorb a big chunk of this cost to launch this program.
And so I would just also add in there, the solution we've found is both going to get us way more than we had thought, but it also is getting it for a fraction of the cost of other potential technology solutions. So I think overall, we have managed to pick the right route for the future and also to keep costs down for the board in the future. Are there any questions?
I have a question, and forgive me if you already said this, but in the past, when we filled out our renewal application, sent it in with our check, we would get a paper confirmation back that we could display. And what's the process for that at this point?
There'll be no changes to the renewal process right now, so you can renew online or via the paper renewal that comes to you in the mail. And once it's processed, it does send the paper renewal where it's got your active license with the new expiration date. That still will be the process, and none of those features have changed. So all of the business modernization right now is for initial applications only. Any future project would have to be essentially something separate that we start out.
Do you foresee that we'll eventually just download that certification and with our new date rather than the expense of mailing it for the board?
I think one possibility that the board may want to look at is to get away from sending out the postcards and the reminders. We are in the process of being able to collect emails for the first time due to our sunset changes. And I think once we have those email addresses and we feel comfortable as a board, having collected those and having a good, healthy database, we could actually start getting to the point of sending out those renewals through email and getting them right to the electronic process so that we don't have to go through the current process is someone gets a postcard, they fill it out, or they get the paper renewal, they fill it out, and it goes to a centralized location. Many people think it comes to the board and that we process these, but we don't see them. We just see the final report. If something gets, bumped out or there's a mistake, then it creates a whole other process and can cause delays. So I think we'd want to get out of that process and get into a more automated electronic process in the near future.
And what I would follow that up with is that this business modernization project has been, while we looked at all processes during the organizational change management part of this process, those other renewal and continuing education and enforcement features, none of those have been addressed with this project and its scope. And those would have to be future projects that I think Paul and I would be eyeballing in the future. Again, we'd have to make sure we have resources. We'd probably look to get a grant if we can. And then also making sure that staff are ready, because it is a huge project for staff to implement these kind of big projects. So we would have to kind of gauge that and also gauge the Department of Consumer Affairs IT operations and whether they have enough resources to take on another project. And to give context to that, there were 13 boards that were in older systems that are working through the business modernization project. There's an entire cohort 2 that we are not a part of. We were in the middle of cohort 1 and 2 and struck out on our own. Those folks also need to go through their project, figure out what platform they're going to. So resources at DCAIT would also be an issue. So we'll have to kind of weigh all those different issues as we determine when to go to a different online renewal. Because right now you currently have online renewals, but it's a little different.
The grant that we received that helped defray the cost of this, is that a one-time grant or can we reapply for that?
I'm going to speak from vague knowledge of CDT's grant project for the Technology Modernization Fund. They were given money and they hope to continue to give grants as long as they have money. I do not know how much is left or how much will remain or how long it'll be available for.
I have heard discussion of boards applying again, and I think that's one of those things that depends on the overall state budget too. If there's money to go into these types of initiatives, and I think we may see this in the future. I also think that the state government looks at, let's invest in something that's going to give us a return and some cost savings in the future. So that was one of the criteria they were looking at. And I just want to add that in any other project I've had in the past, we never had that available to us. So this was some, I think, real innovation on their part to look in that direction on the Department of Technology and the current administration's part.
Okay, are there any other board discussion, board questions on this update on the BizMod project? No hands up. Can I ask the moderator to open for public comment on agenda item number 8?
We are now taking public comment on agenda item 8. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no requests for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
I would, thank you. It seems to me it might be a good time to take a short break. Perhaps 8 minutes would be a little short. Let's say 15 minutes. Kind of an awkward time, but can we do that?
That sounds good.
I guess you could put 10:30 instead of 10:27.
Do you like me to take the roll?
Yeah, I was thinking whether we should do that now or after lunch, but if you think it's appropriate, we can do it now too.
Oh, it's helpful. I'll go ahead and do it real quick.
Okay,
Dr. Raggio,
here.
Ms. Kaiser,
Here.
Mr. Borges,
Here.
Ms. Chang,
Here.
Ms. Dominguez, Ms. Snow.
Here.
Thank you, Gilda. Dr. Valdez,
Here.
Dr. White. Here. You're all here and ready to go.
Okay. All right, let's move along to agenda item 9, update and discussion regarding the board's strategic plan and Governor Newsom's executive order N-16-22. And I believe Paul is going to talk to us about that.
Yes, hello. Agenda item number 9. We wanted to provide you with an update on our board strategic plan and talk about the new governor's executive order. Back in February of 2021, the board approved its 21 through 24 strategic plan, which outlines 5 key goal areas, which with related strategic objectives and activities that are critical in addressing consumer and licensing needs. On September 13th, the governor issued his executive order N-16-22, which requires plans in effect of July 2023 and beyond to be developed to update to more effectively advance equity and drive outcomes. In response, DCA has revised its own strategic plan to incorporate more inclusive public engagement, data analysis, and embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into their process. I just wanted to also mention that I'm happy to have been asked to be a part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion steering committee that the department has come up with. I know Shelley Jones spoke about that a little bit, but the purpose of the committee is to take actionable steps designed to attract, develop, and retain diverse talent, and demonstrate value and respect for individuals and their uniqueness. As part of their strategic plan and their broad strategy, they're looking at 3 key areas, and that is the workforce, to recruit and retain diverse talent. They're looking at the workplace to actively educate leadership and staff to increase awareness and create an inclusive culture. And they're looking at the marketplace and how we serve consumers, applicants, and licensees with sensitivity to their diverse backgrounds and perspectives. That committee is set to kick off in November, and we'll be having our discussion in those areas. As I mentioned before, this is actually a part of the national front too. A big part of our conference for the national boards. And it's interesting because most of the boards that attended the meeting were either southern states or boards that were, on the eastern side of the country. And there was a great emphasis on diversity and how we get diversity on those boards. Most of those boards didn't have the diversity that we, are fortunate to have on our board. Moving on to our own strategic plan, I just wanted to give you an update on some of our accomplishments related to our plan. So one of our goals is licensing. Goal number 1, to ensure licensing standards protect consumers while permitting reasonable access into the professions. The board began, on September 21, the board began providing access to licensing applications, as we've discussed, through Apply Simply, our online licensing platform. We're continuing to launch these additional applications and payments through Apply Simply, as we discussed. We'll continue to work with the budget office to utilize the BCP process. That's the budget change proposal process to obtain the staffing resources that we need to meet the demand for licensing services and continue to attempt to reduce the licensing processing timeframes. The second goal is enforcement, and that is the health safety of California's consumers is protected through the active enforcement of laws and regulations governing the practices of speech language pathology, audiology, and hearing aid dispensing. Currently, again, we're working with DCA through the budget process to attain the resources that we need. And that's an active process. I know I've discussed this to boards in the past. It's a 2-year process for the budget, and it's an ongoing process. We're actually pretty deep into the process right now, and we'll expect to know more probably in the coming weeks of our successes or our not successes. Goal number 3 is outreach and communication. Consumers and other stakeholders are educated and informed about the practices and laws and regulations governing the professions of speech language pathology, audiology, and hearing aid dispensing. In 2021, we began communicating with stakeholders on the status of regulations on the website, and we continue to educate the public about the regulatory process in our meetings and are always looking for ways to increase our transparency. And I covered some of that in my report on the outreach that we're doing. And again, I want to extend the invitation to, professional organizations out there, organizations that work with consumers or consumer protection related. The board is always interested in outreach opportunities as we're permitted to participate in those. Goal number 4 is laws and regulations. The health and safety of California consumers is protected by the laws and regulations governing speech language pathology, audiology, and hearing aid dispensing. Through our sunset review process, we enhanced our ability to communicate with stakeholders by collecting email addresses for licensees and applications. We also enhanced our ability to safeguard consumers by improving our ability to regulate speech language pathology and audiology aids. Currently, regulations regarding the appropriate level of supervision for RPEs and SLPAs are in the process, and we're also working on regulations regarding the appropriate level of supervision for hearing aid dispensing trainees. Goal number 5 is program administration, and the board is committed to efficiently and effectively utilize resources and personnel to meet our goals and objectives. Again, we're utilizing our resources and personnel to launch our new application system, apply simply, and better utilize our resources and staff to increase those communications. A large percentage of our telephone calls and emails relate to applications and the status and update request and regarding deficiency resolution. So we anticipate that the new online application system is going to make a significant impact in these areas. We felt it was important to, provide you with updates on our strategic plan, and we hope to continue doing this at future meetings. Thank you.
Are there any board questions or discussion? I just have a question, Paul. I think you said that the work of the DEI committee, the new committee, is to help bring more diversity to the boards. I'm just wondering if that same philosophy is applying to board staff. Is there an attempt to increase those numbers in board staff?
Yes, I think, we've always seen that emphasis or effort in our hiring. That's been going on for a long time. I think the difference is now we have the administrations, I think in the past have always done that. There is a renewed emphasis and a strong emphasis in looking at board members. So I do think that it's all around in our workforce. We do see it in, with our board member appointees. And the, added emphasis is in also understanding our consumers, especially in California, and making sure that, we are sensitive and understanding to all the different diverse backgrounds and perspectives that exist in our state.
And I would just point out that when it comes to staff, I think this is probably my most diverse staff that I've worked with. So considering other state entities I've worked with, this is a pretty good diverse staff in the office. So I think we've been doing a good job on that effort. So
now we just need to get the professions to move in that direction as well. Is there any other board comment on this topic? Seeing none, I'd like to ask the moderator to open public comment for agenda item 9.
We are now accepting public comment on agenda item 9. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we'll call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, let's move along to agenda item 10, discussion and possible action regarding U.S. Food and Drug Administration's final rule on medical devices, specifically ear, nose, and throat devices, specifically over-the-counter hearing aids. Paul, did you want to start the discussion on that, or?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and just provide a background. I know we've talked a great deal about this. I won't spend too much time on this, but at our January meeting, we discussed the FDA's proposed regulations for over-the-counter hearing aids. We came up with some issues that we felt were important to comment on regarding the regulations. On August 15th, the FDA issued the final rule, and the effective date of that final rule was August 17th. We've listed our concerns in the attached letter. I just want to maybe in our office. I probably heard.
We missed a few words there. I think you
I
went
think
silent.
the signal must have dropped.
Okay. So I'll go back to the effective date of the final rule was October 17th. Since that time, we have not heard much from consumers or from licensees. I have heard from licensees and professional organizations just in anticipating the rule and how this is going to affect hearing aid dispensing in California. So I think we're still kind of, waiting to see. We have heard from, I think I heard about one complaint, just to give you an example, where someone read about this when the press release was put out and, it was released in all the major media outlets. Someone decided that this would be better for them. They were much cheaper. So let me go back to my audiologist and try to get a refund. So I anticipate we're going to be hearing those kinds of complaints. I just wanted to add that there was a letter that was sent out recently, and I don't know if you want to talk any more about that, Marcia. Some of the communications that have gone on back and forth between the professional organizations and the FDA.
Yeah, I will do that. I just wanted to go back to this complaint that you mentioned. Why was that a complaint?
Because this person wanted their money back immediately so they could go buy an over-the-counter hearing aid.
Yeah, so why is that a complaint? That's a normal practice that they can get their money back. Has it been beyond the 45-day trial period?
No.
Okay.
No, I think it was actually just somebody wanting their money back immediately, and people complain about lots of things, and sometimes I agree it shouldn't be a complaint or it should be resolved quickly, but that's not always the case, so we have to look into it.
Okay. In terms of the professional organizations and the FDA, there are three major professional organizations that are kind of spearheading dealing with this issue, and that is the American Academy of Audiology, the Academy of Doctors of Audiology, and ASHA. And it appears that the biggest concern they have is that FDA used language to designate the difference between over-the-counter hearing aids and those that are dispensed by people with licenses. And they determined they were going to be called prescription hearing aids. Well, prescription carries a whole a different problem for the consumer. They then felt that, well, do I have to go to a doctor and get a prescription before I can go to an audiologist and get a hearing aid, which obviously is not the case. So all three of these agencies went back and complained to the FDA, who then published a letter. I'm not sure the breadth of who got that letter, that tried to explain that prescriptive only meant that it wasn't an OTC. Now, where that's going at this point is not entirely clear. The American Academy of Audiology is holding a webinar on November 1st that you can register for. If you're a member of AAA, it's a free registration, where they're going to provide us with an update. So that's all I know at this point, and I do plan to attend that and be able to report back on any changes. But that's the biggest issue at this point. Are there any other board member questions or discussion items?
No, I appreciate your staying on it. It is pretty confusing still, so I think there are lots of questions that we'll still look for answers on.
Yes, it'd be interesting to see how this really rolls out. I've had a lot of patients ask me about it, but they don't, not in the form of a complaint, just as a curiosity, though.
Yeah, same.
My notes are asking for a motion in a second. Do we need a motion on this?
Only if there was action to be taken.
I don't really think so. It didn't sound like to me.
At this time, I don't really think there's anything to move forward with at this point. So I think our prior discussions of we're still good and covered under the Practice Act. We still can regulate our licensed hearing aid dispensers and dispensing audiologists. I don't think it changes any of that. All of the regular rules for warranties and the like still apply to our licensees. And then, of course, we'll just keep you guys informed as we see more questions, concerns, or complaints coming through regarding this, and what kind of level of effort we might need to entertain regarding educational materials. But we'll still keep working on that and provide any updates at coming meetings.
Thank you, Sharice. We did have a meeting with our board council about this issue, just to make sure it was clear to us what jurisdiction the licensing board had, because you may know that the FDA made sure to put in language that says this is not in the purview of the licensing board in terms of marketing, licensure, and so on. But we wanted to see what that reality was, and Michael provided us with the information that, of course, licensees who dispense over-the-counter hearing aids are still liable for any complaints to be treated by the board. If people choose to buy hearing aids from non-licensees and they have complaints, while they can't use Song-Beverly language per se as a licensee would or could be accused of violating, they can use the spirit of Song-Beverly to be able to file a private personal lawsuit against a manufacturer or dispenser, meaning a non-licensee, Walmart, any other entity that's going to be doing that. So I thank Michael Knotes for that. That was very helpful to us. And we explained that to the CAA audience down in La Jolla. Okay, is there any other board questions or discussion on this topic? Okay, seeing none, I would like to ask the moderator to open for public comment on item number 10.
We are now accepting public comment on agenda item 10. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Okay, let's move on to agenda item 11, discussion and possible action regarding foreign body in the ear canal, as stated in Business and Profession Code section 2538.36. And I'd like to ask Todd and Paul to present the information on this issue to the board.
Todd, would you like me to start with the background and then you can go more in depth?
Sure.
Okay, so in July of 2022, the board received an inquiry regarding whether there's any statutory or regulatory language that would restrict a hearing aid dispenser from performing a dome removal if appropriate training is provided and appropriate safeguards and policy are in place to limit that dome removal to lower risk. The dome, just in layman's terms, my understanding is it's that silicone piece that is attached to those to the insert of the hearing aid, or to I think we see them in earbuds too. And if I'm butchering that, any of the dispensing professionals can correct me. But the individual was asking whether this is something that they could do, and they also shared with us some policies that are shared by their company, including procedures and post procedures. We've included relevant Board Practice Act provisions and wanted to just make clear that there are no other statutes. We included cerumen removal and Business and Professions Code 2538, 36A7, and 2530.2 relating to the practice of audiology and cerumen removal. And we also included 2538.14, and the statutory language is following the memo, but there are no other statutes or regulations that discuss if foreign body removal is allowed for dispensing audiologists like there is for cerumen removal, or under what circumstances foreign body removal from the ear is allowed for any hearing aid dispensers. So with that background, Todd, I'll let you go ahead and talk further, more specifically about this issue.
Okay. Essentially, what is at issue is if someone has hearing aid in their ear, a receiver in the canal, the little silicone dome comes out in their ear, whether or not the dispenser or dispensing audiologist can reach in with say a pair of blunt nose forceps to remove the dome from their ear, as opposed to sending them to an urgent care or to a specialist to remove it. I think the idea behind it from the standpoint of the company, which I will say, full disclosure, this is a company that I work for. This was put out by Hearing Life, of which I am employed by. So I think the thought behind this, and I don't know, actually, let me stop here and let me ask if any of the attendees online are from Hearing Life and would like to speak to this a little bit and their and the genesis of this procedure. Is anyone online?
Does the moderator have to open the portal for public comment for that?
The Q&A box is constantly open. If anyone would like to make a comment, please type the word comment in the Q&A box, or raise your hand by dialing *3. Seeing no requests for comment,
Okay.
do you wish to continue?
Yeah, that's fine. I wanted to give them an opportunity to speak to it. I have to say, I feel a little bit weird about talking about this because on the one hand, I do kind of feel a little bit of a conflict of interest, given that this was put out by my employer. On the other hand, it is an area that I think needs to be discussed because we don't have anything in the regs that really discusses this. What Paul is referring to in the visible evidence of significant cerumen accumulation or foreign body in the ear canal, the person has to be referred to a doctor. That really is speaking to what happens prior to a test. that really is not speaking directly to what happens after the fact. I think the premise is, well, I know that the idea behind this procedure and the justification from the organization would be that inserting a cotton or foam dam into the ear is, could be considered a more invasive procedure given how deep it goes into the ear canal that we're already doing, relative to removing a dome from the ear when it's, say, at the first bend of the ear canal, which is pretty much visible to the naked eye and doesn't require any specialized equipment on otoscope or anything of that nature to even visualize the dome. So the question is this something that we, want to maybe shunt off to the Hearing Aid Dispensers Committee to look at further? As is this something we should be looking at for dispensing audiologists and hearing aid dispensers as something that they maybe should be able to do, given that it is a benefit to the consumer in that they don't have to walk around with a dome in their ear for 2 weeks while they're waiting for their doctor to be able to see them to take it out. And then they can't also now wear their hearing aid, because if they stick the hearing aid back in their ear, they're just going to shove the dome farther down their ear canal and make it even more difficult to be removed.
How many of them are trained in foreign body removal? It also depends how far in it is.
Well, I think that's the point of what they're doing, is that they want to actually create training for the individuals so that they are comfortable in and proficient in being able to take the dome out of the person's ear. I think in particular, from my standpoint, it's looking at how far down the ear canal we, would let someone go in to remove it before you say, nope, that's too far. A doctor has to do it. Which is, if you look at their procedures, they actually point that out, that if it's at the second bend of the ear canal, then that's too far. You need to leave it alone and have a doctor do it. They're actually fairly specific in the depth of the dome before the dispenser or the dispensing audiologist would be able to do this procedure. And I will say this is for not just hearing aid dispensers, but also dispensing audiologists, because they also do work in the organization as well. This isn't hearing aid dispenser specific.
I think, Todd, that this takes us right back to the conundrum that we always find ourselves in, this quandary as professionals, about not being able to perform cerumen management for hearing aid dispensers. If there's any wax in the ear, it's not supposed to be touched. Right? And that as dispensing audiologists, if we have an agreement in place with an ENT to supervise the removal of wax, we're allowed to do it in that case. So I can't imagine that being able to remove a dome is going to take us, that's got to be looked at in a similar way as the current regulations exist about what we're allowed not to do, what we're not allowed to do and what we're allowed to do, right? So,
well, that's actually my point, is that
right.
I don't think the regulations actually do state it, and I think they need to. But I also believe that cerumen management is far more invasive than dome removal. It's completely different tools, and you're going in there, and it takes, a lot of time sometimes to go in there and pull it out, and you're far more likely to, I think, have an abrasion or have something happen than doing cerumen management than you are just pulling a dome out of the ear.
Well, I think that just goes back to Dr. Valdez's question about how deep it is, because the domes can certainly be in there beyond the first bend pretty easily as well.
Yep, I agree. And that's why I think it's important to have very well delineated
Yeah, the
rules
question
around
is how
something
many
like this.
people have microscopes to be able to do that when two
Well,
things that are needed, microscopes
mhm.
and judgment. Um,
Do you need a microscope though to see a dome that's at the first bend of the ear canal?
the dome, not so much, but with wax, you don't know how deep it is until you start the procedure, you know?
Yep. And I agree with you, but in this case, speaking strictly, I'm talking strictly about domes. I'm not getting into that hornet's nest about cerumen management. I'm speaking strictly domes here.
Depends on the size of the dome, Todd. If it's a large dome, I agree with you that it's probably pretty visible. Although the forceps I would consider using for something like that does not have a light on it. I don't know if that tool exists, so it's a little hard to see. But if it's a small dome, that can certainly travel much deeper and certainly is harder to see. So trying to hold an otoscope and a forceps at the same time, I would say certainly takes training and a operating microscope. But I'm just wondering about a couple of things. Um, Not only is the dome a potential problem that it comes off in the ear, but wax guards also. That's very common that people put the wrong size wax guard on and it comes off in the ear canal. Would this then continue on to cover removal of wax guards also?
I think it would cover what we say it covers. And if we're speaking domes, and we're speaking domes.
Okay,
I,
so
I think a wax trap is a whole other issue, and not something that I would be interested in broaching, because you're right. It's very small. It's a whole different ball of wax, if you will. Um, and again, smaller domes are a little bit harder to see, and they can travel farther. But that's the whole point. If it's farther down the ear canal beyond a certain point, then it's verboten, and you don't go after it. You refer that person. But I think if the dome is, I think a lighted, I think a headlamp, a magnified lighted headlamp, allows you to see into the ear canal to the first bend, and actually just past the first bend. I don't think you necessarily need to have an otoscope in one hand and forceps in the other. I think if you had the proper tools, you could do this and still properly, bridge and brace.
and you think
If you look at their directions, it's actually a two-man operation.
Yeah, do you think most dispensers have a headlight?
Well, if we're going to make them get a real ear measurement to do training, I guess we could tell them they need to have a headlight if they want to remove a dome.
That's not my question. Do you think they have them?
I don't think they necessarily do, but I think if this is a procedure you want to take part in, then you need to get the proper equipment. I don't think dispensers necessarily have forceps either, but it's just a matter of.
That's where the problem lies. You know, if they don't have the forceps and they don't have the equipment, that means that they don't have the training. Because who's training them if they don't have the forceps, they don't have the equipment? So they'll be doing the procedures de novo, basically.
Well, I think the point of this, Dr. Valdez, is to make sure that they get the training.
Who provides that, Todd, the training?
Yeah, that's
I guess
something
that
I was thinking
would
also.
be up to us to make that determination as well.
I mean, do you think it's a physician uh, or somebody who works for Hearing Life?
Well, I would say the way that they have the training, I would not agree with. I mean, their idea of training is watch a video, which I wouldn't agree with at all. And I am not advocating for their program. That's not my role here. I am merely saying that this brings up a very important point. Our industry has changed over time, and what we're putting in people's ears has changed over. I mean, we wouldn't even have thought about having this conversation, 10, 12 years ago, because they didn't even exist. And hearing aids are changing, and I think we need to keep pace with that and with what we can do to provide assistance to the consumer.
Todd, can I chime in here? Oops.
Yep.
Did you want to say something first, Dr. Rajo?
I just wanted to say that I can agree with Todd's assumption here on the red flag issues. It does say that prior to fitting, and one thing we could consider is creating new regulations that encompass post fitting as well.
And that's what I was going to add, that, you know, we think this warrants probably a greater discussion because we probably need to address this. This may need to be addressed in statutory language. If the board decided to pursue allowing this or not allowing it, I think that it's worthy of clarification in language. We also have other issues to look at, and that is what our exam entails right now, because the qualification for becoming a hearing aid dispenser is currently based on the written and practical exam. So we would probably have to look at our examination too, if we're going to expand what we allow for hearing aid dispensing right now. The purpose of the exam right now is to ensure that someone can safely fit and sell a hearing aid.
As well as troubleshooting issues that arise post-fitting.
Hi, I have my hand up. Can I ask a question?
I'm sorry. Yes, Gilda.
Okay. Yes. You were going along the exact lines that I was thinking about regarding the training, but there is also mentioned of a proposed certification by a clinical team. You know, how would that be achieved?
Good question.
Or do you feel a certification would be needed for this, in addition to training or possible adding it to the clinical examination?
I guess part of that comes down to what does it actually look like? What is the dome removal? You know, how far down into the ear canal are we talking about? Are we talking about something that's basically just inside the ear canal where it's visible to the naked eye? You know, in which case, you know, they're probably going to go in with a set of needle nose, you know, tweezers and try and pull that out themselves. And that concerns me far more than, you know, them taking a breath and letting someone who can at least actually see it to remove it. You know, and how invasive is the procedure that we're talking about, which thereby, you know, dictates what are the potential, you know, side effects. What's the downside?
Well, it may seem simple if it's visible, but if you have a patient who is on blood thinners, you could easily abrade the skin just enough by pulling that out to create a subdermis hematoma.
True, but I can do the same thing, putting a dam in their ear and taking an ear impression.
You could.
So, I mean, it's not necessary, and I think that's their point, is that this is no more invasive, or I don't want to use the word dangerous because that's, I think, really overstating it, but than taking an ear impression. If anything, it's potentially less likely because you're going far less deep into the ear canal.
I don't think you can make that claim.
Well,
Said if they're small, if the patient has attempted to wear their hearing aid or use Q-tips routinely, it certainly could be beyond the first bin.
Could it
well,
be just
again, if
mentioned?
we have rules that say you can't take it out beyond the first bin, then it's a moot point. And I think
How
that's the
about
whole
if we
point
just
of
say at
having
the
that.
entrance of the ear canal?
I'm sorry, say that again?
How about just at the entrance of the ear canal? Just that a part of it is just there next at the inferior aspect of the trachea, nothing more. I think safe enough, that anybody can do it. But further into the ear canal gets a little bit dicey, especially if people have no training and equipment, really.
Yeah,
Well, again, I think that's why we need to have this discussion to decide, okay, do we want to take it that one step farther and say, okay, up to and including the first bend of the ear canal, you have to have training. What's that training look like? Or saying, okay, as long as it's, visible and not beyond the first bend, then it's okay. All these things, I think are worth having a discussion about it so we can hammer it out. And then that way everybody knows exactly what they're allowed to do and not to do.
I'm just concerned that we're leaving the judgment of depth and ease of removal to people who've gained their training via a video, um, and
I
not
I
something more.
I agree. I've never seen even though we train audiologists and we have interns, uh, in our medical practice here at Packard, um, I've never seen them do any type of procedure.
Again, that's fine. I don't disagree with you. I don't think video training is appropriate. But then the question is, okay, do we set up something where we state, oh, you have to have X number of hours of in-person training and determine who that person is? Or do we say, okay, nope, you can't do it unless it's, as Dr. Valdez stated, just past the anterior, and then anything else, no. But I think one way or the other, something needs to be actually in writing. I think this needs to be addressed. And I think the best place to start that, since we're all talking about it, is at the Dispensers Committee.
So, Dr. Raggio, going back to our action requested, is the board staff recommend that we look at this language again, whether or not the board feels comfortable with recommending that this be allowed or not allowed. We may want to refer this to the Hearing Aid Dispensing Committee to at least begin the discussion.
Yeah, I was getting there, but I just want to make sure all the issues are in front of us here, especially if we do send it back to that committee, that they consider statutory and or regulatory language that would address the post-fitting issue as well as our decision about this.
As well as the potential need for the statute that addresses post-fitting, since the other one is pre-fitting.
I'm sorry, Sharice, would you say that one more time?
Especially because both of the statutes for the hearing aid dispensers and for the dispensing audiologist, it isn't about post-fitting. It's all about before they do the testing. So the fact that there's not even a statute or a part of that same statute that discusses pre versus post would be helpful as well.
Right. That's one of my biggest issues.
It's just kind of silent right now.
Is there any
part of the problem is because it's silent? I think that leaves it open for things like this to happen, where someone just says, okay, hey, we're going to do this. There's nothing that says we can't, so let's go for it.
Yeah. And personal judgments always make me nervous about, well, if we put it at the opening, then that's pretty easy to see. But what about the person who says, well, it's only a few millimeters further than that? And, I can mostly see it. It's a judgment call on whether it's meets the criteria for being able to do it. That's worrisome to me. Anyway, is there any other board discussion about this issue? So I'm not seeing any hands up. We need a motion to refer this issue to the Hearing Aid Dispensers Committee. Hearing Aid Dispenser Committee.
I think that would be a good idea.
So would anybody like to propose a motion to delegate this issue for further discussion and development by the Hearing Aid Dispensers Committee?
I move.
I second.
Okay. I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment on agenda item 11.
We are now open for public comment on the motion for agenda item 11. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the motion?
Yes, please. If there isn't any further board discussion, I would like to call the vote for referring this to the Hearing Aid Dispenser Committee for further work.
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio,
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser,
Aye.
Mr. Borges,
Aye.
Ms. Chang,
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez,
Aye.
Ms. Snow,
Aye.
Dr. Valdez,
Aye.
Dr. White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Cherise. Our agenda calls for a break for lunch at this point. It is a little bit early, but I do believe item 12 might be a lengthy discussion. So I'm leaning toward having an early lunch. Can I get some opinions about that?
Do we
Apparently
think
not.
it'll be more than 40 minutes? 45 minutes to
Yeah.
discuss?
I don't think it's more than that, but I don't know. Board staff, Cherise or Paul, do you have a thought about that? Should we?
We could also, if you would like, take up agenda item 13 on the sunset and cover that out of order if you would like. So it's a little bit shorter and you could start lunch maybe around a little like quarter to noon or.
We could actually tackle the topic, and if we think we can cover it in less than an hour or right around an hour, that gets us to 12:20. So I think we may have time to cover this.
Let's live dangerously.
Okay. We'll continue with agenda item 12, overview and discussion on the need for a new license type for audiology assistants under the board's regulation. And I believe that we've been talking about it quite a bit yesterday and this morning. So Heather, I see that you're going to help us with this discussion. Do you have some comments you'd like to make to the board?
Well, if you wanted to kick it off with some background, that's fine. And then I can take over getting into some detail on the sunrise process.
Okay, so as we mentioned this morning when we had the Audiology Practice Committee update on or report on yesterday's discussion, we looked at two different options for dealing with the issue of audiology aids, what they could do, supervisory requirements, educational requirements, and so on. And one of the options for dealing with the concern that individuals may be in these positions being trained by licensees to do tasks that may be considered more invasive, more potentially harmful to the consumer. One avenue of resolution was to consider a new license type. so that audiology aides would become audiology assistants, and we would investigate and likely follow the path that speech language pathology assistants did in terms of gaining their licensure. So we did learn yesterday that it is arduous to undertake a sunrise process, but apparently just as arduous to take on regulatory changes to make other to seek other avenues to resolution for this. So we're going to talk about how arduous is this and what are the processes um, to get a new license type um, authorized.
Okay, this is Heather Olivares, the board's legislation and regulation analyst. And in your materials, I included some information on the sunrise process, and I'll just point out a few of them. But pursuant to Government Code Section 9148, any category of licensed professional proposed for creation by the legislature must go through the legislative sunrise process. Government Code Section 9148.4 requires the sponsor of the legislation, which in this case would be the board, to develop a plan for the establishment of the new category of licensed professional. I included an overview of the sunrise process and a copy of the sunrise questionnaire developed by the Assembly Business and Professions Committee. And I will go over a few key points to help guide the discussion on whether or not the board would like to move forward with proposing a new audiology assistant license type. So if you flip the page to the review of the occupational regulation and the sunrise process, this process accomplishes the following. It places the burden of showing the necessity for new regulations on the requesting group, which in this case would be the board, allows the systematic collection of opinions, both pro and con, and documents the criteria used to decide upon new regulatory proposals. This helps to ensure that the regulatory mechanisms are imposed only when proven to be the most effective way of protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. And then if you flip over to the back, there's the sunrise criteria and the evaluative questionnaire. Central to the sunrise process was the creation of 9 sunrise criteria developed to provide a framework for evaluating the need for regulation. These criteria are unrelated practice of the occupation in question will harm or endanger the public health, safety, or welfare. Existing protections available to the consumer are insufficient. No alternatives to regulation will adequately protect the public. Regulation will alleviate existing problems. Practitioners operate independently, making decisions of consequence. The functions and tasks of the occupation are clearly defined. The occupation is clearly distinguishable from other occupations that are already regulated. The occupation requires knowledge, skills, and abilities that are both teachable and testable, and the economic impact of regulation is justified. So as you move forward with discussing whether or not the board even sees the need for this new category of licensure, it'll be important to look at the category of aid that already is regulated and see if there is a need for a higher level of practice, so to speak, that can be justified to creating a new license type with keeping in mind of the criteria the legislature will be looking at. So with that, I'll take any questions on the sunrise process and the materials provided, and then the board can move into discussing if they even want to pursue this process, if there's a potential need to create a new license.
Can I ask that either Heather or Paul talk about why the legislature um, makes those seeking a new license type go undergo such an arduous process to to create that or to do that?
I'll just provide you with a high level because I think that in creating a new license type, there has always been a rigorous process. The only difference is that this sunrise process was formalized through the business and professions committees working with several boards. I know that in the development of another license type at my previous board, it took about a year to come up with it, and this was actually driven by some of the committee members of the legislature. So I think that it's important that we be transparent and that we show cause, just like anything else. It's going to have an impact on consumers. It's going to have an impact on licensees and potentially on the economy. So I think it's something that the legislature has always wanted. Now we have a more formalized, structured process. Do you have anything else on that, Heather?
No, I think that it just provides an opportunity for the public to weigh in, since the legislative process is a public process. Stakeholders can weigh in, and that's why they want so much data to justify the need, because there is going to be costs to develop this new license type, and we're going to be asking individuals working in this field to now have to go through licensure, which of course there's barriers to licensure that are a concern to the legislature. And so they just want to make sure that the level of consumer protection outweighs all the cons, so to speak, of creating a new license type.
Also, prior to the sunrise process, I think there was a lot more back and forth discussion to where now they want us to get all our ducks in a row in the beginning of the process so that the time element can be addressed.
It also makes it a much more public and open process that someone can review this application, and it's less of those meetings inside someone's office where we're talking it out and fleshing it out. It's an actual, they post those sunrise applications to the Assembly of Business and Professions website, so anyone could take a look at them. And this just, again, gets everybody's ducks in a row and makes it a very public process, because there will be long-term implications and costs.
Can I ask one of the staff to address the notion, or how many sunrise processes for new license types are there, let's say annually, and why, how the legislature looks at these entities? Are there any illegitimate entities that are attempting to become licensed that may drive a process like this?
I don't think any of us could speak to the illegitimate or the variety. I know that there's not too many. When you look at their website, there's only a handful of sunrise applications that have gone through. And each board, it would be a undertaking to add a license type. So some boards may or may not be really looking for it. It may be driven more by a membership association at times. Sometimes it's a joint effort. I've seen that as well. But it still does take time and effort to prepare it. And so I think that's where you would see, if you go to their sunset reports on the Assembly B&P Committee's page, they have the sunset reports at the top and then the sunrise reports at the bottom. And there's only, let's see, 4 types. They've had different reports at different times, but one for applied behavior analysts, athletic trainers, automotive maintenance providers, and regulation of medical marijuana. So there's been different times and different things. So I couldn't speak to the illegitimate side or the other part, though. I wouldn't know how many they get that don't get to a stage where they post the report, or that they start preliminarily and then go away. I couldn't tell you that part.
Yeah, it's an interesting notion that what you see are the ones that made it through, and it's curious how many are attempted. and for one reason or another don't make it through.
Absolutely. I could tell you, it's an interesting process, and before I left my other board, we weren't far into looking at that for a different reason. So, yeah. And then I came over here, so I couldn't tell you what else happened. So. But either way, I think they're, in conversation about it, there is that option to have a sunrise process and a new license type, and then it would have, the 3 levels of aid, assistant, or audiologist. The other options would, anything that you're going to change on the aid side would also take potentially a statutory change, or at least a minimum of a regulatory change. So it's kind of again, either way, it's going to be a lot of work. Just depends on what the need is, what the professional need is, what the consumer need is. And I think weighing all those options and even having at least the cursory discussions is probably an important thing to have.
So if we did the regulatory changes to the aid, that has to go to a different place than a sunset, right? It couldn't be one package per se.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be going through our regulatory process, our rulemaking process.
Yeah.
And as we discussed earlier, we're talking about a 18-month to 24-month process, and that would be if everything went well.
And that's after you've approved regulations. That doesn't include any pre-work the board's going to do to nail down that regulatory language.
Right.
So that's why I say, 18 months to 2 years is once you actually have language the board has already approved and decided on. When you're at the preliminary stages, depending on the complexity of a package, you may be discussing this for a year. On really complex packages, I've seen a board spend 3 years, but they reformulated entire swaths of sections of their regulations. So it just depends on the regulation itself. And until we start really looking into it, we also have to consider whether or not would we need a statutory change. Potentially not with the aids, but we'd always have to keep that in mind. Do we have the authority, or do we need additional authority if we're changing something that seems outside the scope of the regulation or the statute? Sorry.
Well, that's why we wanted to look at the slip of history, if possible, to see if we could save any steps, because some of this has already been done. Todd, I see your hand up.
Thank you. That was actually my question, was if we're going through the regulatory process for the aids and trying to beef up that, would we be looking at a license concurrently, or do we even need to look at a license for them if we're already working on the regulatory aspect?
I thought you were saying that if we went with the Sunrise new license type, that inherently creates changes to the audiology aid, not necessarily beefing up the audiology aid. Am I saying that correctly? I don't want to speak.
Are you asking me or?
Yes, Sharice, you're the one who made that comment.
No worries. So what I would see is there's 2 routes. There's beefing up the aid if that's even the route you want to go. And that's different than if you want to have an audiology assistant who has a clear scope underneath the audiologist, but over and above what the aid can do.
Much of this is driven by the limitations of the audiology aid designation. Remember, we have a designation here that doesn't really it has a training component and a supervision component, but unlike some of the other registrations and licenses, there is no formal training or experience required up front. So we do have some limitations that we might run into. And that gets us to the need, is there a need for audiology assistance? And that may be part of the major discussion if it were referred to committee, is come up with a way to maybe determine that need.
And it might be an exploratory nature in the beginning, where it's looking at, is there the need? What does that need look like? And what other services or therapies might that audiology assistant, if there was one, be performing, because they'd have a certain level of education, training, and clinical experience as field work. Audiologist.
So then, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I really heard it, but are we saying that we would be doing both concurrently, or we would do one or the other?
Possibly both.
Possibly both concurrently.
Okay.
My guess is at least concurrently, at least working on the aid regulations and exploring whether or not to pursue the sunrise process would be the first part. I honestly, even exploring the need and hearing Dr. White and Dr. Raja's discussion yesterday about what would that even look like? What are the potential things it could look like and the need for that level? And then also that would lead us to whether or not there is a need for a more educated and clinically trained assistant level within that practice.
I see Holly has her hand up, and I'm really glad she did, because yesterday I wished there were SLPs on our conversation about the SLIPA history. But
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rajo. I had one quickie question, and then I want to jump right into my comments. I might have missed it, but Sharice, how long did you? I know about how long regs can take, but what did you say about how long the sunrise process can take? Or maybe Heather addressed that.
Neither of us have been through a sunrise process to this point. When I was at my last board, we were just beginning the preliminary talks about a sunrise application with the association, because there was a need for a certain type of psychological testing technician to alleviate standardized testing for those folks. And then I'm pretty sure I came over here within 3 months of that conversations or something like that. So I don't know how they've progressed, whether they've decided to continue on. I don't know what hurdles they've run into. And then Paul could speak to when at VetMed.
I would say it took us from conception of the idea, it probably took us about 2 years. But it was because we had to gather a lot of this information, and again, there wasn't really a formalized process. It was just being driven by the profession, by the committee. So it took us about 2 years.
All right. Well, thank you. And now I'd like to jump into what I was kind of dying to say yesterday. I thought you had a very comprehensive discussion. It was excellent. Some of the questions that came up in the audiology committee discussion about this were, the history of the SLPA. I was looking at that question actually in terms of how long ago it was discussed for us nationally as a profession. And I was reading a little bit about the history, and questions came up years ago in the 60s. But basically it was about 20 years ago that the SLPA profession category was formalized at ASHA, and it's gone through many stages since then. And I remember how controversial it was initially. It took years, I think, to really integrate with how we can best use SLPAs, and they're mostly in schools, but certainly that's they're used in all settings now, but they started off, I'd say, more in schools. But I think Dr. White was bringing up the how our treatment model is different. Our service delivery differs a lot from audiological services, and that we have a shortage of SLPs, as we've all talked about. So this was one of the solutions going towards more effective and efficient services for our consumers. And then there's a lot of focus on SLPs working more at what we call the top of our license, so that we're able to use our expertise to spread out across more people, more consumers, more students, all kinds of clients. But the SLPAs were not supposed to increase the caseload size of the SLPs in schools. In fact, that's in the Ed Code. And they're really helpful when you're looking at increasing intensity, frequency of services, that type of thing. And as was also discussed yesterday, there's a lot of clarity in terms of what kinds of cases they should not be directly providing services to, like medically fragile, swallowing cases and things like that. But there's so many other areas that they're able to carry out very impactful services. I think one of the other questions was about billing. And in schools now, you can bill Medi-Cal, which is the same as Medicaid in California, obviously, but for SLPA services. I believe in Medicare, that is not the case, and Gilda may have information about that. And one other thing that's very notable, which I think will probably come up in other discussions we have, the SLPA supervision requirements have actually changed, and I just was notified about this a couple days ago from a letter I received, a colleague and I received from a university faculty professor who talks about SLPA supervision. And you know, in our proposed regs right now, we've kept the 20% of supervision that's required the first 90 days. And actually, ASHA no longer requires that. And I'd love to find out more about why they made the change they did, but now they have what's called first contact, and that is that it requires the SLP, the supervising SLP, to have first contact with all individuals on the caseload, making sure they've already established rapport, gathered baseline data, secured other necessary documentation, et cetera. So really getting all that foundational work done before the SLPA is working with these clients. And then the supervision would take place at least every 30 to 60 days, depending on the frequency of visits and sessions, et cetera. And of course, you can always have much more supervision, but the 90-day was considered, well, what I understand is that some people don't need that much supervision, some need more, and they felt that this would provide what is accurately appropriate. So that's the end of my comments for the moment.
Okay, Gilda has her hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to chime in regarding the billing. So for the assistants, that is true. Medicare does not reimburse for the services provided by the assistants. And they're considered unskilled services. And services provided by aides are not considered therapy services and are not covered by Medicare. So that is definitely a consideration. Now, this is another topic, though, because CODA's certified occupational therapy assistants and physical therapy assistants, their services are reimbursed by Medicare, but speech pathology assistants are not. So for your consideration.
Holly, you said that 20 years ago, there was the evolution of the SLPA was controversial. Can you speak to, or either you or Gilda, about why it was so controversial and not considered a big help to the industry?
Well, when it was first introduced, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, it was introduced because the thought was that would be very, very helpful. But I think when you look at people, again, I've always been working from the school perspective. So there is always fear with change. I think that's common, and initially there was concern about job security if we have another level of person coming in, and the other thing is again how will their services be accepted by parents, by other teachers? How do you share that workload? All of that, I think we're growing pains of just getting that more established and accepted over the years. And I think that's come to I think it's been very successful. And I know that SLPAs actually have excellent training. And just as a reminder, they have either the associate's degree or they have and clinical practicum, or they have a bachelor's degree in speech and language pathology, and they have clinical practicum specifically for this. And also, I know there's a third route too, if they've come in with another degree and all the coursework that they would be required to do and the clinical practicum. So the continuing education that's developed over the years to actually reinforce that relationship strengthen the relationship between the SLP and SLPA is very strong. So I just say initially it was the newness of it all and trying to fine tune it over time.
Can you tell me if SLPAs are allowed to do endoscopy, for example, with appropriate training? Are they allowed to?
I'll hand that to Gilda.
For the assessments, such as that, at this point, no.
Is it, in writing that's the case, or is it just a matter of logic in terms of consumer safety? How do they?
In one of the California Code of Regulations, it states that they are not able to perform procedures that require a high level of clinical acumen and technical skill. For example, vocal tract prosthesis, shaping or fitting, vocal tract imaging, and oral pharyngeal swallowing therapy with bolus material, which is the food or liquid.
And I'd like to add, even when we're not talking about something that could be physically invasive, they are not allowed to do diagnostic testing. They can do screenings, they can assist with testing, they might be helping prepare materials, they can help program devices, all kinds of things like that, but they can't do testing or even treatment changes or anything that would require clinical interpretation.
Can they do, and maybe Gilda said it in that list, but dysphagia evaluations and treatment?
So the evaluations would include whether it be speech, language, cognition, dysphagia, but the aspect that they're referring to here in the code, oral pharyngeal swallowing therapy with bolus material, would be that dysphagia with treatment with food or liquid.
I'm just thinking that of the graduate students in our program, I've observed them doing that. So students can do it, but SLPAs can't? I mean, they're not doing it as a therapeutic, they're doing it in a training exercise.
Training, yeah.
Yep. They are allowed to do it.
That's fine, yes.
But that's your graduate students, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because even as students, they're performing video fluoros under with the speech pathologist.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think a parallel to that is, in graduate school, you're doing diagnostic testing, you're doing all of that. You have to be trained, but as an SLPA, you're still not allowed to do that. It's just, again, because you are working more independently.
I think that's another topic of discussion too, because I think that should be something they should be able to do, but that's another conversation.
Do they assist with barium swallows in some way?
I would think they could be utilized to feed or help position or prep the bolus, the liquids, the solids. But that's considered an evaluation.
Yeah.
And you'd have to modify your presentation based on what you're seeing right then and there.
Okay.
Depending on if there's aspiration or penetration or residue. Mm-hmm.
I have another couple questions, but does anybody else on the board have any? I was just going to ask Heather at the bottom of page 1 under review of occupational regulations and the sunrise process. Last paragraph, last sentence says the sunrise process includes a questionnaire and evaluative scales that allow systematic collection and analysis of data required for decisions about new regulation. So you've described the questionnaire and we can see the questions there, but can you speak at all to the nature and character of the evaluative scales they're looking for?
No, I unfortunately, because I haven't gone through this process. But if we decide to move forward through this process, we'll have to go through this. There's 57 questions on the questionnaire. Oh wait. Oh, and then on so there's the 57 questions we would have to answer, and then on page 8 of that questionnaire, there's a rating criteria we would have to go through, and then justifying the economic impact. So if we decided to go through this, we just have to work through the questionnaire number by number and make sure we have all the data that's being requested.
Okay. Okay. Can I just verify one thing on the first page of the memo? It says that as part of the sunset review process, the legislature added a renewal requirement to the aid registration, which requires the supervising audiologist to update the board on the duties the aid performs and the training and assessment methods. So can Paul or Sharice speak to that, the details of that, how that's going to work?
I think that we updated our statutes to require that as we discussed, that the aid require a renewal. And then I think that we may also require some regulatory changes to talk about the training. And as you all know, this was an issue with keeping track of our licensing population or the registration population for the aid that was out there. This came up not just in this sunset process, but in the last one. So I think we would probably have to look at some rulemaking here in addressing those needs.
But in regards to the renewal, what we'll be doing is implementing the statute verbatim. So we will be developing a renewal form for trainees that the supervisor can provide the required information and update the board on those items. It will be a manual renewal, but via paper because of what we're asking at the moment. And our current ICAP online solution for renewals, it does not accommodate this kind of questioning. So this will be a manual renewal, but there is a very small aid population in general compared to the rest of our population. So we don't think it's going to be too onerous to simply implement it via the statutory language. So simply ask the questions, provide the answers, and then verify what's going on, and then they'll be renewed via the system.
Is this the similar format that is documented on the initial registration of aid, where they're being asked, or at least the supervisor is being asked to document all the duties the aid is going to do, and providing that very specific information? Then subsequently in the next section, there is a space where there is a description in detail regarding the training methods, that minimum competency level, how it is assessed, the person's responsible for the training, and so on and so forth. Do you foresee it being looking like that?
I foresee it looking exactly like that, where it's a mirror. It'll use the statutory language, but we're essentially getting the update on those items that are required in the initial application, that these are still going on, they're being performed, and what's going on at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further board discussion?
So I thank you very much, Gilda and Holly, for weighing in on the SLP side of it. I think that really helps as we consider this moving forward. I'm just wondering, because this has been a thorn in our side, I think a prickly thing for a long time, and we're trying to alleviate that and make some choices. Are there any recommendations as to what kind of information we should be trying to collect in preparation for going down this path, if should we choose to go down that sunrise path, in terms of, interest level from educational institutions, or interest level from audiologists in the field? Or, is any of that relevant, or is that something we can start working on to maybe help give us some clarity on what direction to go?
You kind of speak to what my brain's already working on. So my thought would be is if the board does want to refer it to the Audiology Practice Committee to work on, that the next steps would be to have it at the next Audiology Practice Committee to work on surveys to both the audiology training community. That would be all the bachelor's programs. And also associate programs that currently do SLIPA programs, and see if they might even be interested in developing this. We do know there's one program here in the state as well. So asking that, and then also surveying audiologists, the audiology community, about whether or not they would see the benefit use of that. And so kind of starting out with the surveys might be a great approach to see how much interest there is right now. And it's also something that might take a little bit of time, but not nearly as much time as sunrise or regulation. So that kind of gets you some input early in the stage.
And I want to also add on, in surveying the audiology committee or community, kind of what kind of tasks they could see assistants doing. And looking at the tasks that SLIPAs can do, they're non-evasive things. So you would want to look at parallels in audiology for things that they can do that aren't going to be invasive, because they would need to have appropriate training in order to do those invasive procedures.
Or what level of education and training would need to be there for those level of invasive procedures?
Right, because that's part of the whole point, right, is to require some education and training, so that, again, if we're talking invasive procedures, we're probably talking ear impressions, but, if that level of training was a part of the programs and part of the practical experience, if that would be acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it seems like it might be a good plan to delegate further investigation and consideration of surveys to gain more information to the Audiology Practice Committee. So I would entertain a motion to do that.
So move.
Second.
Can I ask the moderator to open for public comment on agenda item 12?
We are now accepting public comment for agenda item 12, the motion. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for comment, do you wish to return to the motion?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so unless there's further discussion, I'd like to have Sharice call the roll on delegating further investigation in our motion to the Audiology Practice Committee.
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio?
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser?
Aye.
Mr. Borges?
Aye.
Ms. Chang?
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Ms. Snow?
Aye.
Dr. Valdez? Dr. White,
Aye.
Dr. Valdez. Motion passes 6-0.
Okay, thank you. Well, it worked out to live dangerously here. We took us right up to 12 o'clock. Um, Hopefully this is a good time for us to break for about 30 minutes for lunch. Are we all good with that?
Hi, Marcia.
Yep.
I have to run an errand. Would it be okay if it's like 45 minutes?
It's okay with me.
That sounds good.
Yeah, 45 minutes sounds good.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we'll
Convenient.
reconvene at 12:45.